When my daughter-in-law said those words, "It's such a big house for one man," she probably thought I didn't catch the meaning behind them. But I did. Every syllable lingered like an echo across the lake, carried by the evening wind that slipped through the pines. I just moved into my brand new cabin, my first real home in years, and already the peace I dreamed of began to tremble. My name is Walter Hayes, 68 years old, retired teacher, widower. I spent 40 years in classrooms teaching others how to build things that last: bridges, walls, beams strong enough to carry weight. What I never learned was how to rebuild after a loss. When Helen, my wife of 42 years, passed away, the house we'd shared felt too big, too quiet. I sold it, packed the pieces of our life into boxes, and promised myself I'd find somewhere simple, somewhere quiet enough to hear my own thoughts again. This cabin by the lake was meant to be that promise kept. When Daniel, my only son, helped me unload the last of the boxes, I could see relief and worry fighting in his eyes. He'd always been a good boy, steady and kind, but ever since he married Nora, his edges had softened into hesitation. She had a way of filling the space in every room: polite smile, polished words, eyes that measured everything. She stood by the truck that afternoon, hands on her hips, gazing at the water like she owned the reflection. "This place is beautiful, Walter," she said sweetly. "You'll never be lonely here." Then, after a pause, "It's such a big house for one man." The words were sugar-coated, but the intent cut clean. I smiled, pretending not to notice. I figured I'd finally have room for peace and quiet. Daniel laughed nervously. "She just means it's, spacious. Mom would have loved this view." Helen. Even after 3 years, hearing her name still made my chest tighten. The last conversation we had before she passed comes back to me often. "When everything's over, Walter, find a place surrounded by peace. Promise me you'll rest there." I built this life for that promise. As the evening settled, Daniel and Nora drove back to town. I waved until the taillights vanished between the trees. The cabin fell silent except for the hum of crickets and the soft rustle of pine needles brushing against the roof. I brewed coffee, sat by the window, and watched the moonlight ripple across the lake. For the first time in a long time, I felt close to Helen again. I could almost hear her laugh in the creaking of the wood, her gentle humming in the wind that kissed the glass. Later, I locked the doors, checked the windows, and walked through the rooms, not out of fear, but habit. The floorboards still smelled of fresh varnish. My boots left small trails of sawdust. Everything was exactly as I wanted: simple, clean, and mine. Before turning in, I stepped out onto the porch to breathe the cold night air. The lake shimmered under a silver moon. My reflection trembled in the dark water. An old man, tired, but finally at peace. That's when I noticed something odd. Just beyond the porch, the soil near the front path had been disturbed, faint impressions leading toward the door. Not from my boots. Mine were wider, heavier. These were smaller, sharper, like the steps of someone wearing polished shoes. I crouched, tracing one of the prints with my hand. Still fresh, the earth hadn't yet hardened around it. Behind me, a branch cracked in the woods, quick, deliberate. I turned, scanning the tree line. Nothing but shadows. Maybe it was a deer, I told myself. Maybe just the wind. But as I stood there listening to the quiet lake breathe, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else had already been here. and had no intention of leaving. I've learned something about silence. It invites people to show who they really are. When Nora called the following week, her voice was sweet as syrup. "Walter, we thought we'd stop by this weekend, help you unpack, maybe fix a few things." I didn't need help. The house was in perfect order. But I said yes because it felt polite and because part of me still believed in good intentions. Saturday morning, I heard tires crunching on the gravel road. Daniel's car pulled in first, then another, an older blue sedan I didn't recognize. Out stepped a man and a woman dressed too neatly for the woods, Leonard and Grace Whitmore, Nora's parents. "Mr. Hayes," Leonard greeted me like an old friend, shaking my hand a little too long. "We've heard so much about this place. Nora says it's heaven on earth." Grace's eyes darted everywhere, the porch beams, the garden bed, the lake in the distance. "So peaceful," she said. "Almost a shame it's just for one person." That word again. Just. Inside, Nora took over the kitchen like she owned it, unpacking groceries I hadn't asked for. "You need more vegetables, Walter," she said, smiling. "We'll get you on a proper diet." Daniel kept glancing at me, a quiet apology in his eyes. "They mean well, Dad," he murmured. Maybe they did, but the way Leonard walked through the cabin told another story. He tapped the walls, checked the window locks, asked questions no guest should ask. "So this property, it's in your name alone? Must have been quite a purchase. Did you pay cash or mortgage?" Grace leaned on the counter. "You know, with all the taxes on lakeside property, it's good to have family helping out." I sipped my coffee, keeping my tone mild. "I've managed my affairs just fine for 68 years. Leonard laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, just saying, some folks get overwhelmed keeping up with all the paperwork." After they left that evening, I sat alone on the porch, the sun dipping low behind the trees. The lake looked different now, not peaceful, but watched. I could still hear Leonard's voice echoing in my head, turning the word family into a warning. When I went inside, I found something on the kitchen counter that hadn't been there before, a folded note written in Helen's handwriting. My heart stopped. It was from one of the old boxes I hadn't opened yet, tucked inside a book she used to read before bed. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, the ink slightly faded. "Never let anyone change your home." I held that note for a long time. Maybe it was coincidence I found it now, or maybe Helen was still keeping her promise, even from beyond the grave. Sunday morning, they came again. No call, no warning. This time, Leonard brought tools. "Saw a loose hinge on the back door. Figured I'd tighten it up for you." Grace carried a potted plant, a little color for the porch. Nora followed with a clipboard. "Just taking notes for some small improvements. Daniel says you could use a proper guest room." Guest room? By the time they left, I felt like I'd hosted an inspection, not a visit. Daniel hugged me at the door, guilt written all over him. "Don't worry, Dad. They're just trying to help." I smiled faintly. "I know, son." But when I closed the door behind him, my stomach turned. Something had shifted. The next morning, a rumble echoed down the road. A delivery truck pulling up beside the cabin. The driver waved a clipboard at me. "Furniture delivery for the Whitmore residence." And just like that, I realized I wasn't the only one calling this place home anymore. The first letter came on a Tuesday morning. A thick envelope stamped, "Welcome to your new community." I thought it was a mistake, some random flyer. But when I looked closer, the name printed neatly on the front wasn't mine. It said Leonard and Grace Whitmore,
Lakeside Cabin, Route 7. I stood on the porch, reading it again, the ink glinting in the sunlight. My name was nowhere on it. I set the letter aside, convincing myself it was a postal error. But the next day brought another, this one from the electric company. Same address, same names. By Thursday, even the bank statement came addressed to Whitmore. I drove into town and spoke to the clerk at the post office. "It looks like someone changed my address," I said. She clicked through her screen, brow furrowing. "Yes, sir. We have a new forwarding request on file, approved last week. Whitmore, Leonard and Grace. It says they reside at your property now." For a moment, I couldn't speak. "That's impossible. They're guests, temporary visitors." She looked uneasy. "I'll flag it for review, but if they submitted verification, I can't reverse it without documentation. Maybe you should speak with them directly." That drive home felt longer than usual. The lake shimmered beneath a pale sky, but I didn't see beauty anymore, only intrusion. When I arrived, their car was already in the driveway. Leonard was on a ladder fixing something that didn't need fixing. Grace was sweeping the porch. Nora was sitting on the steps, scrolling through her phone, not a trace of surprise on her face when I walked up holding the letters. "What's this?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. She looked at the envelopes as if they were nothing. "Oh, that. I had their mail redirected here. They'll be moving in, whether you like it or not." Her words were calm, rehearsed, deliberate, like a woman who'd already decided she owned the ending to my story. "I didn't agree to that," I said quietly. Nora smiled faintly, like a parent humoring a child. "You said you wanted company. They're family. You'll get used to it." Before I could answer, Daniel came out carrying a box. "Dad, it's just temporary. Their lease expired. They need a few months, that's all." "Temporary," I repeated, the words sour on my tongue. Leonard climbed down the ladder, wiping his hands. "We'll stay out of your way, Walter. We'll handle the chores, keep the place running smooth." Grace added softly, "Think of it as having extra hands around. You'll thank us when winter comes." But their eyes didn't match their voices. They were already measuring the place. Walls, windows, ownership. By sunset, their belongings had filled half the living room. Boxes labeled dining set and personal files stacked neatly against the wall. Daniel promised he'd sort things out, but I could tell he didn't believe his own words. He looked tired, cornered between loyalty and marriage. That night, I stood at the window and saw the reflection of my cabin lights dancing across the lake. In the faint glow, I noticed something else. A pair of silhouettes walking the property line, flashlights sweeping over the fence, pausing by the shed where I kept my tools. My neighbors across the road had their porch lights on, watching. I could almost hear their whispers, "He's letting him move in." The next morning, the smell of fresh coffee filled the air, but it wasn't mine. Grace was in the kitchen, humming softly, her back to me. I greeted her out of habit, but she didn't turn around. "Good morning, Walter. I made breakfast. Hope you don't mind." I didn't answer. I just walked past her, through the hallway that suddenly felt smaller, unfamiliar. When I stepped into the living room, my breath caught. Grace had rearranged the shelves. The framed photos of Helen, our wedding day, our first Christmas, the picture from Yellowstone, were gone from the mantel, replaced neatly with a porcelain angel, a floral vase, and a framed family portrait of the Whitmores. My voice came out colder than I meant. "Where are my wife's pictures?" She turned, smiling gently. "Oh, they're safe, dear. I just thought it was time for a fresh start." And that was the moment I realized this wasn't about helping me live. It was about erasing the life I'd already built.
By the end of that week, I had stopped calling it my house out loud. Every corner of the cabin had been claimed by someone else. Leonard's toolbox sat on my workbench. Grace's floral curtains covered the kitchen windows. Nora's shoes lined the porch like she'd lived there all her life. And me? I was the quiet guest who paid the mortgage.
At breakfast, Leonard spread papers across the table like he was hosting a business meeting. Electric, gas, property tax, he said, tapping each page with his pen. I'll handle these from now on. I'm organized that way. I stared at him, then at Daniel, who sat there looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. I didn't ask you to handle anything, I said. Leonard chuckled. No offense, Walter, but it's easy to let things slip at your age. We're just helping out. Nora looked up from her phone, smiling with that sharp, empty sweetness. You should be grateful, really. Dad's done this kind of thing for years. He's saving you time. Grace poured coffee into my mug without asking. Cream? No. Just black. She smiled anyway and dropped a swirl of cream inside. It spread through the dark coffee like smoke. I didn't drink it. Daniel tried to cut through the tension. Maybe it's just temporary, Dad. They're trying to make things easier. Easier, I said. Not loud, just enough that everyone froze. I spent 40 years working double shifts to make life easier. I don't need help living in my own home. Nora's tone snapped like a whip. You don't know how to share, Walter. That's the problem. You think every space belongs only to you. She stood, gathered her plate, and left it in the sink without washing it. Grace followed, whispering something about me being lonely since Helen died. The name hit me like a slap. After they left, I sat there alone, staring at the untouched coffee. In the living room, Helen's portrait hung above the fireplace, still smiling that calm smile that had steadied me through every storm. I spoke to her quietly, the way I used to, when no one was around. I spoke to her quietly, the way I used to when no one was around. They've taken your chair, Helen. The one you used to sit in, by the window. Grace said it clashed with her decor. The words burned going down. I hadn't cried since her funeral, but that night, I came close. Later, Daniel knocked softly on the doorframe. Daniel? Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't think they'd... Daniel? I said, turning toward him. Do you honestly believe this is temporary? He hesitated, eyes darting toward the hallway where Nora's voice carried faintly. I think it's complicated. That's one word for it, I muttered. He looked torn, like a boy again, caught between two parents and a house that no longer felt safe. He'll talk with Nora, he said. But his tone already admitted defeat. After he left, I sat in the silence, hearing them laugh from the other room. It wasn't cruel laughter, just ordinary, domestic. That made it worse. They were settling in, normalizing what wasn't normal. The following days blurred together. Leonard fixed the gutters, Grace organized my pantry, Nora updated the guest room into her office. They used my truck without asking. My mail disappeared into Grace's hands before I could see it. One afternoon, I caught Leonard standing by my filing cabinet. He looked up, smiling. Just making sure your insurance paperwork is current. I'll take care of the renewals. You've got enough on your plate, I said. My plate's fine. He laughed. We'll see. That night, I sat in the dark living room scrolling through my phone. I wanted distraction, but habit drew me to the banking app. just to confirm that my accounts, at least, were still untouched. The numbers looked the same. For a second, I let myself exhale. Then I saw it. A new notification at the top of the screen. Authorized user added, Leonard Whitmore. The air went still around me. My reflection in the phone's glass looked older than I remembered. Harder. Somewhere down the hall, Leonard's laughter echoed. That was the moment I knew. They weren't planning to leave.
There comes a moment when anger turns cold, when it stops burning and starts sharpening. That's where I found myself. The house felt smaller each day, crowded with voices that didn't belong, footsteps that never hesitated. But inside my silence, something had begun to take shape. It started that morning when Leonard announced over breakfast, "I called the insurance company, got your policy updated under my name, easier that way." He smiled like it was a favor. Nora nodded her approval, spooning sugar into her coffee. Daniel sat there, eyes down, stirring his own cup until it went cold. I said nothing, just smiled faintly and stood to rinse my plate. That was when I made the decision, not to fight back loudly, but quietly, thoroughly, the way Helen used to handle storms. Back in our first year of marriage, we'd faced eviction from a landlord who'd sold the house without warning. While I ranted, Helen folded laundry and said calmly, "You always win with silence, Walter. They never see it coming." That memory stayed with me all morning. I found her wedding ring in my desk drawer, small, worn, warm, even after all these years. I held it tight between my fingers. "I'm still learning from you," I whispered. The first step was digital. I drove into town, parked behind the bank, and used their public Wi-Fi to change every password I owned. Email, bank, retirement, everything. I transferred my savings into a new account under a trust name I hadn't used in years. The banker didn't ask questions. Old men moving money rarely raise alarms. Next came the lawyer, David Thornton, a man I'd once helped design a backyard deck for when his kids were little. We hadn't spoken in a decade, but his voice on the phone was steady, respectful. "Mr. Hayes, I remember your work. Let's meet discreetly. Bring your documents." "I can't," I said. "Not yet. But I need you ready." He understood without more words. When I returned home that afternoon, Leonard was sitting in my chair, reading the newspaper like he belonged there. Grace had baked something sweet, cinnamon thick in the air, a scent that used to mean comfort. Now it felt like intrusion. "You look tense, Walter," Grace said, with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Maybe you should take a walk. Let us handle things here." So I did. I walked to the property line, stopping by the shed. From the outside, it looked old, forgotten, perfect. I cleared a space on the workbench and unpacked a small box I'd bought that morning, 2 motion sensor cameras, small enough to hide behind beams and book spines. One for the study, one for the living room. That night, while they watched television, I retired early. Instead, I worked quietly, installing the cameras where no one would look. Each blinked once, blue and brief, before disappearing into the dark. When I rejoined them, Leonard raised his glass. "Glad you're settling in, Walter. We're one big family now." I smiled. "That we are." He laughed, content, believing he'd won. Later, in the quiet of my room, I opened my phone and linked the camera feeds. Both signals came through crisp and clear. I set it beside the bed, Helen's wedding ring resting next to it. Hours passed before the sound came, a faint creak from the floorboards. I turned the screen toward me, heart steady. There he was, Leonard, moving through the dark, careful not to wake anyone. He walked into my study, flashlight in hand, opening drawers one by one. Then he found what he wanted. He lifted the property deed, held it under the light, and began taking pictures with his phone. I watched, silent and still, the blue glow of the screen painting his crime across my face. For the first time in weeks, I smiled, just slightly, because now I had him.
Daniel arrived late that night, shoulders slumped, eyes ringed with exhaustion. I'd asked him to come alone, and to my surprise, he had. Nora stayed behind in the city, probably assuming her charm had already done its work. He stood in the doorway like a man stepping into unfamiliar territory. "Dad, what's so urgent? Nora thinks you're upset because you're not used to company." I gestured toward the table. The laptop waited there, screen glowing softly, paused on the image I'd been replaying for days. Leonard in the study, flashlight in hand, rifling through my drawers. "Sit down, son," I said quietly. He frowned. "What's this?" "Proof." I pressed play. The video rolled, Leonard's movements, precise, deliberate, the flash of his phone camera, the clear shot of the property deed in his hands. Daniel's mouth parted, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "Dad, is this real?" "As real as that ring on your finger," I said. "You've been living under the same roof as people who are trying to take everything I have." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. No, this can't be right. Maybe he was looking for bedtime reading? Come on, Daniel, you're an engineer. You know what a pattern looks like. He stopped moving, jaw tightening. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "Because you weren't ready to believe me." He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. The truth was written all over his face. He'd seen what he needed to see. "Does Nora know?" "Oh, she knows. But she'll have a story waiting for you when you ask. She's good at that." He hesitated, then nodded once. "I'll talk to her. Be careful. She's not afraid of turning things upside down if she feels cornered." Daniel left the next morning after breakfast, saying little. His silence told me he was fighting a battle I couldn't fight for him. By evening, the storm came, and it had Nora's voice. She burst into the house like a gust of cold wind, cheeks flushed, fury simmering beneath her calm. "You showed him those ridiculous videos?" she demanded. I didn't answer. "You've lost it, Walter. You're old, paranoid, and you've got him believing your fantasies. Cameras, secret recordings. Do you hear yourself?" Her performance would have impressed an audience. She even managed tears. Quick, precise, perfectly timed. Daniel followed behind her, torn between loyalty and clarity. "Nora, please." "No, Daniel. Your father is trying to turn you against me. Against us. Can't you see that?" I stood there, hands resting on the back of Helen's old chair, the one that Grace had tried to remove. My heart was steady, my voice calm. Helen's words echoed in my head like a compass. Never raise your voice when the truth already speaks for you. I looked at Nora. If you're innocent, you shouldn't fear evidence. Her lips pressed into a tight line. Evidence can be faked. Daniel exhaled, looking between us, torn open by the space that honesty had created. I need time, he said finally, voice barely above a whisper. I need to think. She reached for his hand, but he pulled it away. That tiny movement, so quiet, so final, was louder than any argument. Nora left not long after, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Daniel sat down heavily on the couch, elbows on his knees. I don't know who to believe anymore," he said. "Then believe what you saw," I told him gently, "and what you feel when the house goes quiet." He looked at me, eyes wet. "You've changed, Dad." "No," I said softly. "I just stopped pretending not to see." Later that night, I went to bed exhausted, but strangely lighter. For the first time in weeks, I felt the air shift. Not peace yet, but possibility. When dawn came, I reached for my phone to check the camera feeds. Nothing. Every screen was black, every device offline. I walked through the house, heart sinking with each step. The power cords lay on the floor, cleanly unplugged, the lenses turned toward the wall. Out front, gravel marked fresh tire tracks leading down the drive. Daniel's car was gone.
The call came just after sunrise. My lawyer's voice carried that steady tone I'd come to trust. "Walter," he said, "you were right to move fast. They filed a petition yesterday morning, tried to transfer your deed under the Whitmore family name. But we got there first. The property's under a protected trust now, untouchable." For a moment, I didn't say a word, just stared at the lake outside the window, the water rippling like it was nodding in agreement. "Thank you, David," I finally said, "for helping me keep what's mine." He chuckled softly. "No, Walter, you didn't just keep it, you beat them at their own game." When I hung up, I slipped Helen's ring back into my pocket. I could almost hear her laughter, quiet, knowing. By mid-morning, the Whitmore's car rolled up the drive again, dust swirling behind it. Leonard got out first, adjusting his tie like he was arriving at a board meeting. Grace followed, lips tight, eyes darting. And then Nora, calm, deliberate, walking like she owned the ground beneath her. "Morning," I said, leaning on the porch railing. Leonard gave me a condescending smile. "We need to talk. There's been some confusion with the county office. Seems they misplaced your title paperwork." "Confusion?" I repeated, feigning innocence. "How strange. I actually spoke with my lawyer this morning. He said everything's perfectly in order." Nora's eyes flickered just for a second. "Your lawyer?" "Yes," I said, stepping closer. "David Thornton. You remember him, don't you, Daniel? He handled your first mortgage years ago." Behind her, my son stood motionless, shoulders heavy, eyes clouded. He hadn't looked at me since he returned last night, quiet as a ghost on the porch. Now his gaze shifted between us, realization dawning. Leonard cleared his throat. "Look, Walter, we can make this right. Maybe a partnership of sorts. We'll manage the property, handle taxes." I cut him off. "No need. That's already taken care of. The house is under a trust now, one that doesn't include you." Grace's voice cracked. "A trust? You can't do that." "I already did." Nora's mask slipped. Her tone turned sharp, venom wrapped in politeness. "This is absurd, after everything we've done for you." I laughed softly, but deeply. "Done for me? You mean moving in without permission? Changing my mailing address? Adding Leonard to my bank account?" Daniel's head snapped toward her. "Wait, what?" She froze. "Daniel, he's twisting things." "No," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. I showed him the screenshots, every camera capture I'd saved before they unplugged the devices. Leonard with the deed, Grace in my study, Nora handing her father my documents. Daniel's face went pale. "You used me," he whispered. Nora reached for him, desperate now. "Daniel, listen." He stepped back, voice trembling. "You made me believe he was paranoid. You made me choose between you and my father." Grace's composure broke first. She slumped into a chair, muttering prayers under her breath. Leonard's face hardened,
but I could see the panic settling in. I straightened, the calm in my voice startling even myself. This house was built on love, not greed, and that's why it'll never be yours. Leonard glared at me, lips curling. You think you've won? I don't have to think, I said simply. The sheriff will confirm it soon enough. Right on cue, a vehicle pulled into the driveway, county seals on the door. The deputy stepped out, papers in hand. Leonard Whitmore? The man's bravado cracked like glass. As they exchanged words outside, Nora turned to me, tears streaking her face. You ruined us. No, I said softly. You did that yourselves. She stormed off toward the car, shoving past Daniel, who didn't move to stop her. Grace followed, clutching her purse, hands trembling. And then it happened. The strap tore, the purse hit the ground, and its contents spilled across the porch. Lipsticks, receipts, and one cold, metallic sound that echoed against the wood. A spare set of keys. I bent down slowly, picking them up, the weight familiar in my hand. Funny, I murmured. I never gave you these. Grace didn't answer, but the silence between us said everything.
The Whitmores left the lake the way they had arrived. No goodbyes, no apologies, just the hollow sound of tires grinding against gravel. Within a week, the sheriff's office had opened an investigation for attempted property fraud and financial manipulation. The deputy came by one morning to return my house keys, the real ones, sealed in a small evidence bag. "Looks like you were right all along, Mr. Hayes," he said. I didn't feel triumph, just a quiet kind of relief that reached deeper than anger ever could. When the door closed behind him, the house seemed to exhale. For the first time in months, there was silence again. Honest silence. No footsteps in the hallway, no forced laughter in the kitchen, no scent of someone else's coffee filling the air. Just the hum of the lake breeze moving through open windows. Nora didn't stay to face the consequences. Daniel told me she packed her bags and left for her parents' old home in Illinois before the investigation even began. She said she needed space, he told me, voice cracked from too many sleepless nights. I didn't answer right away. We stood on the porch, watching the sunlight glitter across the water. The same lake that once felt invaded now shimmered like a mirror reflecting peace back at us. "Dad," he started, but his throat caught. "I didn't see it. I thought you were just angry or lonely. I should have known better." I looked at him, not as the boy I raised, but as the man who had to learn his own lessons the hard way. I said gently, "You saw what you wanted to believe. We all do that sometimes." He nodded, eyes red. "You never raised your voice, not once. And still, you stopped them." I smiled faintly. I didn't need to. Some people only understand silence after it echoes back at them. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. "There's something I want to give back." He handed me the old family photo that Grace had taken off the wall. It was of me, Helen, and Daniel at the county fair, summer of '93. Helen was holding a blue ribbon, her hair windblown, her smile brighter than the sky. I found it in one of Nora's boxes. Didn't seem right for it to stay there. I took the frame carefully. The glass was cracked, but the picture underneath was untouched. "Thank you," I said quietly. Daniel's eyes filled again. "Can you ever forgive me?" I already did. But forgiveness doesn't mean we forget what we learned. He nodded slowly, then walked down to his truck. The engine started, but he didn't drive off immediately. For a long moment, he just sat there, staring at the water, like he was waiting for it to tell him something he couldn't hear yet. When he finally left, I stayed on the porch. The light had shifted, painting the lake gold. The air was still. Peace had returned not as a gift, but as something earned. I walked down to the dock with Helen's ring in my palm. The metal was cool, shaped perfectly to the curve of my hand. "You were right," I murmured, staring at the calm water. You always are. The lake reflected the sky in perfect stillness. The world, once loud and restless, had gone quiet. For the first time in months, the house felt like mine again. And I finally understood. Saying no isn't about anger. It's about peace. I turned to go back inside when a sound broke the quiet. A knock at the door. 3 slow taps. Then a voice I knew, softer now, uncertain, but real.
Dad, can I come home?